Welcome back on the AM show. And as we kickstart our big stories, we focus on the Public Interest and Accountability Report for 2022. Now, it shows that for 2 consecutive years, 2021 and 2022, 1.74% and 2.39%, that was what the Ministry of Finance was not able to meet in terms of the requirement of transferring 5% of the APFA to the District Assembly Common Fund. PIAC also reiterates that government should direct disbursements to the GIIF intended for Agenda 111 to the Ministry of Health under the health component of the Education and Health Priority Area to support the Agenda 111 project. Additionally, that same funding, GIIF, should focus the utilization of its share of APFA on its core mandate of investing funds in commercial infrastructural projects in accordance with the GIIF Act and policy guidelines of the fund. Well, today we're discussing these and more with our guest. He is Vice Chairman of PIAC. I'm talking about none other than Nasir Alpha Mohammed. A very good morning to you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks for coming. So we're just talking about how many times you have been on the show with me. For me, this is my second time, but for you, this is your third time on this platform. I'd just like to start from this latest report and what it evinces. We've had a number of reports in recent times showing different things, but as far as this specific PIAC report is concerned, in summary, what are the major takeaways as far as you're concerned?
Thank you once more, and good morning to our viewers. For me, I think PIAC is continually doing its work as mandated by law. And for those who have been following the work of PIAC, its establishment, and what it has been doing for the last 11 years, PIAC is mandated to do 3 things. The first is to be able to do compliance monitoring of what is required of duty bearers under the law. The second is to give a platform for the people of Ghana to debate the propriety of how petroleum revenues are being utilized. And then our final mandate is for us to do independent assessment for each year of how petroleum revenues have been utilized. And for each year, we are talking about 2 statutory reports. The first is a semi-annual report, and the second, an annual report. For the year 2022, we have published both reports. We published the 2022 annual report in September, the 2022 semi-annual report in September 2022, and then the annual report was published this year, 2023, in April 2023, as required by the law. And so, essentially, what I would say is that we have followed the due process of the law, but we have discovered also that there have been a number of interesting observations, some of which you have just indicated. The fact that even though the highest court of this land, that is the Supreme Court of Ghana, has pronounced that 5% of the annual budget funding amount each year should go to the District Assembly's Common Fund, this has not been fully complied with in the last 2 years. We say so because instead of the 5% that should go to the District Assembly's Common Fund, less than that amount for each of those 2 years has gone to the District Assembly's Common Fund. For us, this is a violation that, for whatever reason, we do not know why it happened. But we are praying that going forward, this doesn't repeat itself.
You say this is a violation that, for whatever reason, shouldn't have happened. The law is the law. I believe the last time we had a conversation here, we spoke about some of these self-same issues. It appears we're not making any progress in that regard because the law is what it is, yet somehow we're always skirting the issues, circumventing the law, and what ought to happen doesn't happen. It also hampers our developmental progress as a country. So, I mean, really, in that respect, a certain percentage should be going to the District Assembly Common Fund. 5%.
Yes.
For how long has this happened? Where I mean, we're talking about 2021 and 2022,
yeah,
but previously.
I think it is important to establish the facts as they are. The Petroleum Revenue Management Act itself did not make a provision for any percentage of money to be sent to the District Assembly's Common Fund. It took the Honorable Podo, for those who know the Honorable Podo, yes.
Right.
It took the Honorable Podo and another member to sue the Republic, advocating that petroleum funds generally should form part of the total revenues of Ghana for purposes of calculating the 5% revenue that should go to the District Assembly's Common Fund for distribution to the various municipal and district assemblies, metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies. Now, the Supreme Court did the analysis of the submissions made by the Honorable Podo and Co. and came to the conclusion that it is not all the funds established under the Petroleum Revenue Management Act that applies to what they are advocating. But they agree with the Honorable Podo and his other colleague that only the annual budget funding amount out of all the other disbursements that we may have in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, it is only that annual budget funding amount to which should be applied or considered in determining the 5% revenue that should go to the District Assembly's Common Fund. And so once the Supreme Court says this is the law, PIAC considered that it should be followed in due process. And this happened in 2019. So the expectation was that from 2020, 2021, 2022, they should be sending this 5% to the District Assembly's Common Fund. Now, in 2020, we did not actually see disbursements to the District Assembly's Common Fund. But PIAC advocated strongly that it should not happen. And so in 2021, effectively, the disbursements to the District Assembly's Common Fund started. But as you have already indicated, instead of 5%, only 1.74% of what is due the District Assembly's Common Fund was sent in 2021. Then in 2022, instead of the 5%, only 2.3%.
At least it was better than the previous year.
Of course. So maybe there is a progressive improvement in terms of what percentage is being disbursed to the District Assembly's Common Fund. So essentially, this is where we are coming from, just in less than 3 years. So hopefully, because the whole thing started in 2019, and once the law comes into effect, it means that from the 2020 fiscal year, government ought to have started disbursing the 5% to the District Assembly's Common Fund. But we started getting information about the disbursement in 2021. And we expected the full 5% to have gone to the District Assembly's Common Fund. That didn't happen. What happened was, like I indicated, significantly less than that amount. So for the 2 consecutive years, that was what happened in terms of the District Assembly's Common Fund.
Now, even as we talk about the District Assembly's Common Fund, what, per your report, I'm sure you also find the trajectory of what the absence of this is causing to the districts, for example, in terms of what they can do, the provisions that must be made in the districts, the infrastructure that must be put in place. For some, it may be police, security posts and all of that. What has been the cost of not having these funds available to the districts, per the report?
It's a huge cost. It's a huge cost because we do district monitoring, we do regional monitoring of projects being funded with oil money, and it is simply appalling. There are some projects that are standing, for more than a decade now, supposedly being funded partly with oil money, but they are not yet complete.
Because it's realistically is it 2010?
Yes.
That we started with.
But at least between 2011, when we started receiving revenues, and 2019, we cannot really put the blame on this particular amount. But the blame could go to essentially disbursing the annual budget funding amount equitably across the nation. However, between 2019 and 2022, as we sit now, or 2023, we could attribute the lack of disbursement of the full percentage required by law to these district assemblies. We could actually advocate that, yes, it is causing a lot of problems. So, for example, we just returned from our regional engagements where we visited certain districts. I led the team to the Upper West region. The chairman of PIAC led another team of PIAC to the Bono region. Now, in the Upper West region where I led the team to, we observed a number of things which were really not, okay for us. So we have a health center at Egu, which is a community in the Wild West district of the Upper West region. Now, this health center is supposed to serve over 24 other communities surrounding that particular health center. Yet, we have only one ward which admits both males and females, right? So if your wife is sick, she's there. If I am sick, I'm not the husband, I'm likely to be admitted in the same ward where, and we know what can happen at the various hospitals. Sometimes you have to be helped to remove your share, do other things and all of that. And this is the kind of condition we are talking about. Some oil money is going into that project since 2020 and 2021. But the project had been awarded in 2011, 2012. So you ask yourself, between 2011, 2012, up till now, that is typically a decade. This project has not yet been completed. This will lead to cost overruns and then time overruns. Of course, first, let me say time overruns, which will then lead to cost overruns in the long run. And we have a big issue with that. Then we're talking about building dams or small dugouts in the various communities. Then we visited a community like Yibile, and then an adjacent community where 2 dugouts were made. And these were dugouts or small dams that were done supposedly to aid the indigenes to be able to farm during dry season. And it is not serving the purpose for which those dugouts were made. We were told by the indigenes that during dry season, the whole place is even dry. It is only because when we went there was some water there because it had rained heavily in the past few days, and so there was some water. But the way a manner was constructed was such that on the other side of the embankment, that is where the people actually farm. But on the side where we have the dam, we don't have any farmlands around that place. Why
was that?
Yeah, you see, the idea is that at the point where you are designing the project, you ought to have including canals that could pass the water from the dam itself to where the people are farming. That has not been done. So what it means is that if they really want to use the water, you have to use a bucket manually, cross over from your farm to the dam, fetch water, and then cross over again to be able to. And it's hectic.
Tedious.
Very tedious. That's not serving their purpose, and they were complaining when we got there because we interviewed some of the indigenes. And that for us is not a prudent way of applying oil revenue. So for the Upper West region, we were hugely disappointed in terms of these 2 projects in particular. And that cuts across the whole country. We have been to other districts in the past where we have been told that they were actually looking at investment in the agriculture industry more than what they are seeing. And so it begs the question whether the indigenes were even consulted at all in terms of what are their priorities and what we are pushing the oil money into in those communities. So yes, we can say that there is a cost to this whole thing, especially at the district assemblies, the subnational areas in this country.
When we look at some of your key findings or observations, one thing that hit me was the fact that over the last few years, crude oil production had been declining in Ghana. But interestingly, on the back of the same dynamics we've woefully cried about, COVID-19 and in fact the Russo-Ukrainian war, in 2022, our oil revenue was the highest we've ever seen, $1.43 billion.
Yes.
How do you put these together? Because in one breath, you would say, oh, it's been declining. So maybe that is why even what is going through the APFA to the District Assembly's Common Fund has been handicapped or hobbled. But in another breath, we've actually got more than we've ever had from oil revenue just last year.
Yeah.
What sense did you make of the disparities we're seeing in the system versus these statistics, so to speak?
Actually, I wouldn't say it's a disparity for those who understand how the oil industry works. Petroleum pricing, the petroleum sector itself is very volatile.
Right.
Oil prices are very volatile, and then they play to the demands of the market and all that. So, and essentially, when we are doing our projected revenues, we also consider the projected production that we are likely to get. Now, in 2022, the minister pegged the benchmark revenue at around 65 or 66 thereabout per barrel. And in the course of the year, we all saw that oil prices catapulted to over $100 per barrel. And so that essentially, even though we had a decline in production, the fact that we have a very high oil price per barrel in the course of the year also enabled us to get more revenues at the end of the day in a single year than in any other year that...
Of course, the reality is that while we gained so much, we also lost so much.
Yes. In terms of production, we lost. So by assuming we had succeeded in producing so much, we would have even gotten more than we have gotten now in terms of revenues. That is what it just simply means. But it is essential for us not to confuse the fact that because we have, let's say, declining production, essentially we will have declining revenues. The dynamics can change. Where oil prices in the world market has actually increased that high. So you may have declining production, but you may actually have
a higher price.
Yeah.
Which also tells you that if we're able to shore up production, because there are some who are saying in terms of production capacity, there's so much more we can be doing. We're just doing a drop of, in a bucket.
But it is...
What has been the rhetoric in that regard as far as PIAC is concerned?
For us, I think it is essential for people to understand that we have only 3 producing fields in this country.
Right.
The Jubilee field, the 10, and then the SGN field. Now, and we also have to understand that we have an exhaustible resource. Oil and gas is not forever. At some point, it will be depleted once we are producing it.
Hopefully, at some point, we'll discover more wells.
Exactly. So that is what we should be looking at. Are we investing enough to ensure that we are able to discover new wells, we are able to discover new fields where we can produce from? And we need to understand that the productive lifespan of an oil field is somewhere between 20 to about 30 years. And now, if we take the Jubilee field, for example, we have been producing from the Jubilee field from 2010 up to now. That's
13 years.
That's about 13 years. So assuming its productive lifespan is actually just 25 years, it means that we have gotten to the peak. We are now actually declining. The ability of the field to produce more will begin to, decline. And so we should understand that we are getting to the peak in terms of...
But just on that point, it will also be dependent on, yes, the entire, I don't know what the measurement is, cubic meters or whatever of resource we have down there, and then the quantum we've been extracting over the years. It may not necessarily be the number of years, because the quantum that is stored there will then also be a determinant. It could even go past 50 years, depending on whether you are taking so much.
Yes, you determine that. You determine the level of, the depletion rate from all these factors. So to be able to say that it will take you about 20 to 30 years, you know that you are considering the depletion rate as part of your analysis in doing so.
Right.
So far, what we are doing now, it will mean that the average life, that's why I use the average lifespan. The average lifespan of an oil field is actually between, some will say 25 to 30, some will say 20 to 30, whichever is the case. All I'm trying to say is that, assuming it is 25, in the case of the Jubilee field, it means that we have done almost a half, and we are now on the decline. In the case of 10, we would have done about 10 years now, because 10 came on stream 2016. And in the case of SGN, 2017 to now. we would have done just about 10
So
years.
10 would have done about
as
70
well.
years thereabouts.
So it means that we need to actually ensure that we put more investment into this industry to ensure that we are able to discover more oil fields so that the production will continue. It will continue to have more production levels, which will give us more revenues. And then we know that we are on course. Otherwise, since it is an exhaustible natural resource, we will soon lose it. That's all I can say for now.
We'll soon lose it. And of course, posterity will not have the benefit of that. Let's go back just briefly to the District Assembly's Common Fund. So with what has been happening, 1+% in 2021, about 2.39% in 2022, and the fact that per what Bodo and Co. fought for, we're looking at least 5%. We've also discussed the consequences on the district assemblies. What is PIAC's recommendation as far as that specific one is concerned? And what alternatives do we have? Looking at the financial space, the tight financial space we're in right now, looking at the IMF program and the projections and all of that, what would you say realistically we can do? Can we meet 5% this year, the year to come? What is the reality?
You see, the law is the law. When the law says 5%, there are considerations to it. So for us, what we have recommended is that the ministry in determining, the ministry should, in the subsequent years, ensure that they comply. We say subsequent years always because for the year that we have reviewed and report on, the enforcement is not on PIAC. The enforcement lies with the Parliament and with His Excellency, the President. They can engineer processes towards enforcing the infractions of the law. But for those who know, if you look at Section 58 of the law establishing PIAC itself, that's the PRMA, it ensures that, or it makes it clear that infractions of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act are essentially criminal in nature. And we all know that the only person with the prosecutorial powers in this country is the Attorney General of Ghana. So what it means is that to be able to effectively enforce the law, the Attorney General will have to be brought in squarely. And that could happen either through His Excellency, the President, who is directing the Attorney General to do further investigations into this particular finding of PIAC, and then to see if there are established facts to proceed with prosecution, or Parliament summoning the Minister for Justice and the Attorney General and probing further to see whether or not there are good bases for any prosecution, and directing the Attorney General to be able to do that. Those are the ways it could be done. There are those who think that because PIAC is doing such a fantastic job, that is what we have heard from the people of Ghana, and that then why not give powers to PIAC itself to prosecute where they think that there is a clear infraction of the law. And so for us, we have given our recommendation. Do not repeat that. You have no right to, give only half of what is required by law to the District Assembly's Common Fund. But in terms of enforcement at the moment, any other citizen of Ghana could also decide that on the basis of PIAC report, I want to test the law, by going for other interpretation or seeking to do private prosecution and all of that. So yes, at the moment, PIAC is somewhat, our hands are tied in terms of enforcement, but we do always give our recommendations.
I just had to bring that because, again, it would appear that you recommend, and you recommend, and you recommend.
Yeah, we've been recommending for
forever.
For the last 11 years, 12 years.
And the powers that be.
Some of them, they are able to follow through. Others, they are unable. But because the law is essentially a criminal legislation, if you fail to do what is supposed to be done, that could be a crime. Or if you have done something contrary to the law, that is a crime. So because of that, we would have expected that for a decade, no person has so far been prosecuted
That's the very
for
point I was about to get to.
of the law. And so for PIAC,
realistically,
yes.
Nasir, so you look at it, the president in, president out, they will not trigger the necessary processes for the Attorney General
Yeah.
to, follow suit.
But at least Parliament could.
Well,
Being the
Parliament-
elected representatives of the people of Ghana.
Why do you think that hasn't happened?
Well,
Because of the majority system?
it's one of the reasons you could think of, but there are instances where Parliament is united on certain issues. I think that when it comes to management of our petroleum resources, our parliamentarians should be united in doing what is right for the people of this country.
But let's be realistic. So in this instance, for example, the finance minister, would be culpable in a way. APFA, the required payments from APFA to the district assemblies was not made. That is criminal. It means that the finance minister himself would have his head likely on the chopping board. And this is his government in power. Realistically, how do you see that happening?
Well, it is very difficult.
Oftentimes, you would even have some of his deputies and the rest are in parliament.
Political will.
How do you see that happening?
Political will is a very important thing when it comes to enforcement of the law. Laws like these that require or that borders on criminality, if you don't have the political will to push through, it might be difficult. But I think that we cannot rule out our politicians entirely. I believe that we have good persons in politics who can say, to hell with my political party per se, and push through the agenda that will help the people of this country. So for us at PIAC, we are apolitical. We don't care whether it is NPP in power or NDC in power. We are there essentially to represent the voice of the people of this country. And so where we think there are infractions of the law, we highlight them. And when we highlight them, we leave them to the politicians, to now do what is right, because they are the duty bearers under the law. Yeah, so when we speak to some of these issues, people should understand that we are speaking generally from our hearts after interrogating the data that has come before us from the various stakeholders in the industry. And so
people shouldn't take it.
No, not at all, not at all. If you look at how PIAC membership is formed, you would understand why I'm saying it. For example,
and I completely understand.
I'm a nominee
I'm just bringing it up so
of the
that
Bar Association.
You can actually educate people more, because the likes of Dr. Steve Mantea, your former chairperson, I mean, there's nothing in there. There's no interest.
Not at all. I'm a nominee of the Ghana Bar Association. And the Ghana Bar Association can recall me if I am not doing things rightly. And for 4 years now, I have been representing the Ghana Bar Association on PIAC. Of course, for some of us who are doing 4 years now, by September, we are out of this committee. And then a new member would be appointed or nominated by the Bar Association to replace me. And all these things happen to check us also that you are not easily cowed in after 4 years. You are now used to all the ministers and the stakeholders that you are unable to do your work very well. So it is a tenure system. 2 years, renewable another 2 years if your constituency, if your constituency thinks that you are doing well, they may return you after 2 years. If they think you are not doing well, after 2 years, they bring another person to replace you. We also have another group of PIAC members who just come 3 years straight. Those are the groups that do the rotation system. So, for example, you have the Christian groups. We have the Catholic Bishops' Conference. We have the Charismatic group. So if you represent the Charismatic group, after 3 years, you are not getting any renewal. So it's straight 3 years. You go, then the Catholic bishops may bring another person for another 3 years. In the case of Ghana Bar Association, which is just a single group or entity, that same member can do 2 years with the liberty of the Ghana Bar Association to renominate him for another 2 years. And that is what has happened to both myself and my predecessor, Dr. Stevens.
And I would just like to say that your reports, your work over time has really been refreshing, and it's given us a lot to reflect on as a country, and definitely we stand with you. But there's a key finding, the industrialization priority area.
Yeah.
Key, because I have always said that if we want to make Ghana that land flowing with milk and honey, industrialization is the way to go. But interestingly, if you look at the IPA, you would find that per the report, 9.29 million was given. That constitutes about just 0.2% of the entire AFA total.
Yes.
Now, what should have gone to the IPA should have been over 200 million, if memory serves. And if you look at the percentage that was actually given, it was just over 4%. I think 4.29%
yes.
that was yielded. That is a pittance. It's even less than 5%. What does this indicate from the findings? And it's not just the IPA. If you look at the GIIF, that's another area, especially when we're talking about health infrastructure. But let's start with the IPA. What does that really mean?
Yeah, the industrialization priority area. First, the law gives an opportunity for the Minister for Finance to choose up to, and I'm using my words advisedly, up to 4 priority areas out of
that's
12 priority areas listed in the law for a 3-year tenure, of which you apply the annual budget funding amount to those 4 priority.
In simple terms, out of the pool of 12, you select 4.
Yes.
And then for those 4, they become priority areas.
Yes.
And then there are certain specific percentages that must go to
As
those
for
areas.
The percentages, they are not specific.
Or funding that must go to those areas.
Yes, there are no specific funding. But it is the duty of the government to select 4 priority areas. Of course, once you select an area as a priority, we expect that if you have budgeted that much for it, priority should be given to it, and then the budget applied to it. That is essentially the problem with the industrialization priority area. It is one of the 4 priority areas that the government selected. But as you yourself have observed, look at how meager it is. Right. At the industrialization priority area received an amount of 9.29 million, which represents 0.2% of the total ABFA, which is 4.4 billion. The disbursement, which represents 4.29% of the amount budgeted for the priority area for 2022, does not reflect giving priority to industrialization in the use of the ABFA. So
the amount budgeted was 216.3.
Exactly, 216.3.
9.29 million was given.
Yes, which is very, very small, just 0.2%.
What does that show?
So it shows that
thematic areas we select them. Are we just selecting them because we must, without necessarily doing what goes into making them priority in the first place?
You know, PIAC has advocated in a recent report, that is our 10-year Petroleum Revenue Management Usage Report, which we commissioned in 2022 from 2011 to 2020. We have advocated that in order for the minister to choose the 3 priority areas, they should do some kind of evaluation of how the 3 priority areas in the subsequent 3 years have been utilized, how they have fared, and all of that, in order for them to choose the new 3 priority areas for parliamentary approval. But I'm told that the ministry has been doing something like that, and we cannot say it is not true that they are doing so, but that is what they are claiming. But we feel that if actually we do those evaluations, then it is possible that some of these priority areas that we are pushing out should not be those that are out there. Because we also visit the communities, we speak with the indigents, and they tell us different stories of what they really need and all of that. So for me, it is so bad, especially in this case, that industrialization is seen as a priority to government, but in terms of practical implementation, it has not been given the needed priority that it deserves. Some have argued that, as for budgeting, you only project, and that it does not mean that when you budget this much for something, that is exactly how much you are going to spend. But we have a concern. Look at the difference in quantum between how much has been budgeted and how much has actually been spent on the industrialization priority area. And then you will understand where PIAC is coming from. If it was even closer to the budgeted amount, or even 50% of the budgeted amount, then PIAC will not be advocating this way. But we do so because if indeed industrialization is a priority to government, then they should be spending close to the amount they have budgeted for industrialization. Otherwise, it cannot, in our eyes, be seen as a priority area.
Let's talk about the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, the GIIF. Now, at least you would realize that in 2021, almost 300 million, about 290 plus million was channeled into that. Last year, it was over 600 million. That's almost a three turnover leap in terms of the figure. But you're still saying that more can be done and that, in fact, this should be channeled directly to the Ministry of Health when it comes to Agenda 111.
Yeah.
Please explain.
Our case is simple. The Agenda 111, or one of the priority areas that we have, has to do with health itself. Fiscal infrastructure and service delivery in education and health. So what we are advocating is that since Agenda 111 is essentially a health infrastructure issue, why didn't government push the whole of the amount that should go into the Agenda 111 to that priority area through the Ministry for Health for purposes of the Agenda 111? Now, when you come to the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, the act establishing the fund is clear on how it should invest funds coming to it. It should be commercial in nature with the aim of some returns to the state. So the question we asked ourselves when we were doing our analysis was whether the Agenda 111 is in the nature of a commercial infrastructure that would bring some returns generally to Ghana per se. So we believe that since the Agenda 111 is something that could be categorized under the Ministry of Health, it is better for a government to rather push the whole of that amount through the Ministry of Health to ensure that the ministry supervises the Agenda 111 project. If we want to give any money to the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund as demanded by law anyway, then we should allow the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund to use that funding to invest in what it thinks is best within the confines or dictates of the law establishing it. And so normally we would cite the Terminal 3, Kotoka Terminal 3 as an example, where some oil money, not the whole of the Terminal 3 was built with oil money, but some oil money went into the cost. And then we have been told that we are making some returns as a nation through citizens and international traveling, citizens traveling internationally and other persons coming in and all that. So we're seeking to advocate that for Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, we should give them the opportunity to use funds that are given to them from oil funds to apply in accordance with their law, nothing more. We don't want a case where government keeps directing GIF, do this with your money, do this with your money, when in fact there is a law governing how they should handle their finances.
So in other words, the commercial infrastructure projects as well, you touch on that. Yes. It should be applied in a certain way to ensure some continuity. Yes. And of course, these
and that we can monitor.
Paying for themselves.
Exactly, and that we can monitor these returns and all that.
Let's also talk about the GNPC.
Yes.
They are heavily in the mix. You mentioned JOHL, its subsidiary, if you like, among others. Yeah. What is there's been a lot of concern about the GNPC in the last few years, sustainability, revenue flows, and all of that, and its role in a number of cases, some of which have ended up in court and all of that. How well is the GNPC faring per this report?
We are currently unhappy at PIAC because of how JOHL is being treated. Of course, GNPC clearly disagrees with us on our position, but we will reiterate.
Which is what?
We will reiterate that the JOHL cannot just lift crude oil, sell them, and then keep the revenues to themselves without the revenues passing through the Petroleum Holding Fund. We maintain
The PHF.
that the PRMA, which is the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, is clear that all revenues accruing from upstream petroleum operations, whether directly or indirectly, constitute oil revenues and should first be paid into the Petroleum Holding Fund before they hit any other account. You will remember that in our 2022 semi-annual report, we reported about an amount in excess of 100 million United States dollars, which was realized from a lifting by the JOHL, and which monies were paid straight to JOHL in their accounts offshore. And we had a problem with that because we thought that that was petroleum revenue that ought to have come to the Petroleum Holding Fund. And then we advised against doing that. Then in the same year, after the semi-annual report, there had been 2 additional liftings by the JOHL, and the proceeds from those liftings, which now amounts in total to over 200 million United States dollars, are still left with the JOHL. And we have a big problem with that. We think that this is an infraction of the law, and we are not going to rest on this one. At the moment, PIAC is trying to organize a roundtable where all the major stakeholders would come together to have a significant debate. I mean, a very important debate on this, because if we allow GNPC to utilize this avenue of doing things, I'm telling you, we are doomed. We are doomed because a very cunning GNPC boss will no longer use GNPC qua GNPC in the commercial arrangements in this country. It will always create a subsidiary and make the same argument that Ghana can only benefit from the dividends that the subsidiary may declare, and not from the liftings or the proceeds of the liftings that that subsidiary is taking. And if that happens, GNPC, and you and I know, when will JOHL ever declare dividends in the first place? I mean, when will they declare profits and this much profit and then say that we are giving this much dividends to the Republic? There are certain things we shouldn't do as a nation. One of those would be to ensure that whether GNPC or any subsidiary of GNPC that is lifting our crude oil, the proceeds from that lifting should go straight to the Petroleum Holding Fund. And I will make all the necessary, I'll canvass all the necessary legal points to buttress this issue. GNPC is not just any other company. GNPC, by law, represents the commercial interest of the people of this country. And when you even look at the acquisition of JOHL itself, you use our state resources to acquire an entity. Then you turn around and tell us that we have no interest in it unless you declare dividends. Like, seriously? I mean, for us at PIAC, it doesn't make any sense. And we think that we will debate this issue until finality is brought to bear on this.
What finality, really? I mean, I'm looking here about the cap of $100 million and how you say that in 2022, for example, a proper application of the formula would have returned a cap of $638.87 million. So we are bleeding, obviously. For whatever reason we are subscribing to these arrangements, only God knows. But on the point of you're not resting until something is done, the reality is, let me be blunt, you can't do anything, can you? There's nothing you can do. You're practically toothless bulldog.
You see, the important thing
and that's my problem.
The important thing to note is that if we did not have an entity like PIAC in Ghana, by now we wouldn't even be talking about petroleum.
I wholly agree. I wholly agree on that.
We won't even be talking about petroleum revenue.
But the point to be made is, while you come out with all of these beautiful reports, fantastic, the powers that be simply jettison them. They don't apply them.
You see, what I want to say is that even though enforcement has been a problem, there is an essential role that these reports are playing, and then the findings are playing.
Definitely. I mean, they also feed into reports that even international organizations use as well.
They are queried all over as to why ABCD is happening. PIAC report says ABCD, and they are queried all over. And I tell you, look at our revenues from mineral resources, for example. We've been mining gold, bauxite, diamond for over 100 years. Can you point to one single infrastructure in this country where you can say that this is where our mineral revenue went to? Even some few projects that you can point to and say that mineral revenues have been used for this and they are identifiable. It is difficult to make out. How we account for our mineral revenue is a difficult thing. It is so much the case that the Petroleum Revenue Management Act is so good a law that we have people now calling for a mineral revenue management law, or expanding the application of the Petroleum Revenue Management law to cover accountability in the mineral revenue management.
And as for that, so it's another ball game altogether. Because there are years when you can have Ghana declaring in entirety that it has sold this amount of gold.
Yes.
Then one country will tell you that what we got from Ghana was so much more. So why the disparities? Yeah. But that's another question.
So transparency and accountability are important things in the management of natural resources, especially the revenues. And PIAC is essentially helping this country to achieve those two. In terms of transparency, it's no longer a question. Everybody knows that PIAC has 4 duty bearers to make things so transparent that they cannot run away from it. Because when GNPC gives me their report, I try to ensure that I do my analysis of whether or not it's the same reporting that is coming from, let's say, Petroleum Commission, especially in respect of data concerning production in particular, right? Because PC will do their monitoring and they will have their production figures. GNPC will have their production figures. The international oil companies themselves will have their production figures. When they don't reconcile, if we are unable to reconcile these figures, we call them to a validation meeting for them to reconcile them for us. So we simply don't just take information you give us. We go beyond the raw information you give us to interrogate other data we receive from other entities before we come to a conclusion. So for me, the work PIAC is doing is a huge one. Some of us will go, but will remain advocates for PIAC. Whoever becomes PIAC members or executive will continue to support them on this cause. It's a great cause, I must say.
It is. It definitely is. And that was why I was doffing my hat to you, my imaginary hat, to you earlier on the show. But the failure for implementation to be brought to bear. And like you mentioned, some of what the LI and what it stipulates border on is basically criminality. And it's being, flouted with...
Yeah, for example, you just indicated...
the greatest impunity.
You indicated the cap on the stabilization fund.
$100 million.
Which is the LI, the $100 million.
Right.
What is the genesis of this? Now, in 2019, we had a legislative instrument which is supposed to operationalize the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. And that itself was problematic. When I say problematic, in terms of the timing of the that legislation. We had the Petroleum Revenue Management Act in 2011. And the Act says that we should have a legislative instrument as soon as possible to operationalize the law. But we waited for 8-9 years for us to have that legislation. You can imagine the kind of infractions that would have gone on between 2011 and 2019 when the legislative instrument was finally enacted. Now, having been enacted, the legislative instrument says that in order to put a cap on the stabilization fund, you have to consider the average annual budget funding amount of 3 years. And those 3 years, we are referring to the current financial year, the year immediately before the current financial year, and the year immediately after the current financial year. Those ones will be, that one will be like the projected ABFA for that year. You consider them and you take their average. That is where you place the cap on the stabilization fund. We are saying that for the year 2022, if we had correctly followed the formula, it would have returned a cap in excess of 600 million United States dollars.
683 million.
Yes. Meanwhile, it is still pegged at 100 million. And the 100 million ton came in 2020, transitioning 2019-2020, when COVID-19 hit. And the minister was forced to go to Parliament for us to be able to, for Parliament to reduce the cap to around 100 million.
I just checked. It's actually 638.87 million.
Exactly. So that is how the cap should have been. But the minister retained the $100 million that was approved by Parliament in 2020. Now, our problem is this. Whenever you go to Parliament with your budget, you know that is the appropriation bill, technically. And when your appropriation bill is approved for you, it is for a fiscal year and not more. For one financial year, one fiscal year and no more. So if Parliament approved 100 million United States dollars as the cap on the Ghana Stabilization Fund, the expectation for PIAC is that if you wanted to retain the same 100 million the following year, you go back to Parliament for approval.
Right.
And for 2022, you go back to Parliament for approval. Now, since that approval, the minister had not, we have checked all the budgets from that period up to now.
Over, basically.
Yes, it has just been rolled over. And then the the ministry's argument is that this has been approved by Parliament, and we say no. Parliament approved it as part of the budget, as part of the appropriation bill, and the appropriation bill is approved for just a fiscal year. And so if it was approved for a fiscal year, and you just assume that it is approved forever, it cannot be the position of the law. So for us, we have a problem with that. We think that
flagrant.
Yes, we think that it is a breach. The minister ought to have revisited the formula provided in the legislative instrument. And if he had revisited that formula, it would have returned a cap in excess of 600 million.
Before we get to the myriad recommendations that you've made, the crucial ones among them, because you've already started talking about some of them. In this specific instance, you've already made mention of a sort of call on Parliament to be more, maybe proactive when it comes to some of these. What would be your call in that regard, especially in respect of the finance minister? Because a lot of these infractions, in fact, they are all under him. Basically, the APFA, from the APFA to the IPA to everything else we're talking about. I don't know who the other duty bearers are, but what would be your charge to Parliament and parliamentarians on this in respect of, or vis-a-vis the situation vis-a-vis the finance minister?
Like I indicated earlier, to the best of our knowledge, we know that Parliament has been interrogating the PIAC reports. And just on Tuesday, last Tuesday, I saw on the order paper of Parliament that they were considering our 2021 annual report. I think so. I mean, the report of the Finance Committee on PIAC's 2021 annual. I saw something like that. So yes, we appreciate the work that the Finance Committee and Parliament generally, have been doing with our reports and all that. The problem has been, as you have indicated, when you go out and people interrogate you and say, you people, you make all sorts of findings and recommendations and nothing happens. Then we say, oh, our duty by law is to report to Parliament.
Right.
Our duty by law is to report to His Excellency the President, and then to you, the citizens of the Republic of Ghana, which we have been doing. Beyond that duty, the law has not imposed on us any duty of enforcement. In fact, it has not given any powers of enforcement to PIAC. And like we have indicated, the legislation itself establishing PIAC is like a criminal legislation. When I say it's a legislation that is couched as a criminal legislation, because infractions of that law are seen as criminal offenses. And criminal offenses, as I indicated, the prosecution is in the hands of the Attorney General. But the Attorney General,
punitive
but the Attorney General may decide to cede some of his prosecutorial powers to any other entity for purposes of enforcing the petroleum revenue infractions.
Do you think we should get to that point?
There are people advocating
on the back of the history. Do you think we should get to that point
where
there are people, the Attorney General's powers should be clipped in a way and given to, let's say, a body, I don't know whether PIAC specifically, but for enforcement purposes?
That's why I'm saying that when we go around the country, there is a strong call by citizens of this country.
Do you have any parliamentary advocates on that?
I'm not too sure about that yet. I'm not too sure about any parliament. But there is a strong advocacy from the people that PIAC, either PIAC or an independent body, like we did with the special prosecutor, where we have ceded some of the prosecutorial powers of the Attorney General and given to the special prosecutor to prosecute cases concerning corruption. Some are of the view that because of the repeated infractions of the law, I mean the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, we should be able to give PIAC some powers of prosecution. But what it will mean is that PIAC will need to have a legal department or a prosecutions department and build the capacities of the prosecution department to be able to do that. You know that the Attorney General has ceded some of his prosecutorial power to Senate to be able to prosecute offenses concerning infractions around the Senate law. Yeah. So in the same vein, the Attorney General could cede some of his prosecutorial powers to PIAC or to any other entity that is established by law for purposes of prosecuting cases concerning infractions of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. In the same vein that we have police officers prosecuting some motor traffic offenses in our courts. That particular prosecutorial power is in the hands of the Attorney General. But through either an executive instrument or a legislative instrument, the Attorney General is able to cede some of those powers to them. Or through an act of parliament, the Attorney General's powers of prosecution has been ceded to, say, the special prosecutor for corruption-related offenses. So, would the Attorney General be ready? Would Parliament be willing? Would the President have the political will to say that enough of the infractions on this particular law and that let's do something unique where any finance minister or any other duty bearer under that law will know that if I do this and it is not in line with the law, I'm likely to be facing prosecution the very next moment. If we are able to do that, it will help us greatly.
So this recommendation is not here, but
I'm
just saying that this has come off.
Yes, just off when you ask the question
off the cuff. But let's get to some of the recommendations you make on the back of this latest report and what it shows. You say there is the need for Ghana to speed up the sustainable development of its petroleum resources to reverse the decline in production and all of that. But from the discussions we've had, from the GIIF to the IPA, the Industrialization Priority Area, to GNPC and the role it's playing in there, and the capping to everything else that we've had, discussed on the show, what would be your major recommendations, the most important ones that you would like to leave all of us with?
Well, we are talking about the industry today because we are producing oil. And so the first recommendation is to be able to continue to to produce optimal production of crude oil. And if you look at that, is our first recommendation. Except that we have been very careful to add the word sustainable. Sustainable because there is currently a thesis globally that advocate that we should move away from fossil fuels to green energy. And therefore, those people will be advocating that leave the oil in the ground and let's focus on renewable energy.
Africa has spoken about that realistically, because we are also on that curve when it comes to development.
And in Africa, and then the developing world, they say no. We would rather prefer what we call energy progression. So the energy progressionists argue that you people have developed your economies so well. And, allow us to also use our God-given natural resources to also develop our economies, because our economies are essentially, crawling behind you. We are not doing well. To be able to do well, we will need to utilize our resources and all that. So give us the opportunity. So the energy progressionist, I am an energy progressionist. For me personally, I would advocate, and I know there are so many members of PIAC who advocate along those lines. Give us the opportunity to utilize our petroleum resources to develop this country. But we are saying that in doing so, let us do so sustainably. So at the back of our minds, we should put in place structures that would ensure that the environment is not unduly disturbed. So you look at our mineral resources and how we are mining gold and all that, the environmental concerns, we should be able to check those concerns in the oil and gas resources with the benefit of the lessons that we have learned from the mineral resources. So we advocate for more investment in the sector. We advocate for GNPC to be given the opportunity to invest more. So I'm an advocate of GNPC actually getting more funding for investment purposes to ensure that we have more, oil coming on stream. The only problem that some of us have had with GNPC is how they have apportioned money that comes to them and spent. So, for example, you would realize that they spend so much on recurrent expenditure and all that, and not on the core mandate that GNPC is given, under the law. And so we are advocating that if the monies come to you, we want to be able to see that you are spending so much of the money on your core mandate and not on what you call corporate social investment, which is corporate social responsibility. And there have been instances in the past where even monies have been given to traditional authorities and all of that from GNPC. Ghana Black Stars at some point was being sponsored by GNPC. So you ask yourself, you have a core mandate. Why do you depart from your core mandate to be doing some of these things? They advocate that it is corporate social investment. And we appreciate the fact that every international oil company or national oil company worth its salt must do some corporate social responsibility. They call it corporate social investment. However, the quantum of money you pump into your corporate social investment should not be nearing what you are pushing into your core mandate.
Right.
And that has been our problem with GNPC on that. But recently, GNPC is doing so well in the Voltairean Basin, which is one of the petroleum basins of Ghana. It is onshore. GNPC alone is the one that is there. We don't have any partners with GNPC on the Voltairean Basin at the moment. They are doing exploration, and we will advocate that the government gives them all the needed support to ensure that we at least are able, in the shortest possible time, to discover some oil in the Voltairean Basin, which will also aid in our, upping our production volumes, and that can also translate to some revenues for Ghana in the future.
All right.
And so, yes, that is one big recommendation we will give. The other big recommendation will be about, the gap between the law and then the enforcement. That is not how we have couched it in our recommendation, but I'm combining a number of recommendations on this one. The fact that if the law requires this, do that. Don't do it halfway and leave it. So, for example, you look at the DACF. If the law says 5%, why give 1.5%? It is not as if the money didn't come. It came. So the remainder, what did you do with it? The remainder that was supposed to have gone there and you didn't send it there, what did you do with it?
Right.
And how are you accounting for that? So those are important things we think we should take into consideration.
The very final bit, it's a very short bit. At the tail end of your report, you say it is the expectation of the committee that the general public will read the report and provide feedback via secretariat@piacghana.org for those of you who would like to reach out. But what I find curious about that, how widely is this disseminated? You want the generality of Ghanaians to read it and contribute, give feedback and all of that. I don't know what the response has been, and I don't know how many people actually read these reports, but what push have you put through in that regard to ensure that a lot of Ghanaians are familiar with your reports, and that is also a way of putting pressure on the powers that be?
Yeah. So you see, first, it is a requirement by law that we publish our reports on the state newspapers and bring it generally to the notice of the people of Ghana. And also, to be able to do our assessment, we can't do any proper assessment without feedback from the people. But so this request at the tail end of our report is just an additional, provision that we have made to ensure that we get adequate feedback. Otherwise, we have other ways of getting the feedback. So like I told you, we just returned only last week from regional engagements. We went to Upper West, we went to Bono. In the next few months, we'll be going to other regions of the country. Last year alone, we did about 7 regions of the country, going around to various districts, interacting with the people, having regional and district fora to debate oil and gas. And we take the feedback from all these places, to help us do our independent assessment of how best we are utilizing the oil revenue. So essentially, they themselves, the people of Ghana knows we have been coming to them. We come to their doorsteps, but we are encouraging those who, sometimes you go there, they are not able to advocate all the issues that they have. So if you have additional issues which you have not yet been able to inform us, you can easily use this particular avenue, reach out to PIAC, tell us what your concerns are, and then they will be taken into consideration in doing our analysis and may feature into the next report of PIAC.
Well, Nasir, it's been quite a conversation, and we're grateful that every time we call, you actually seize the opportunity to join us here and educate all of the populace about the work you're doing and what the latest reports actually show. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
And that is Nasir Alpha Mohammed. He is Vice Chairman of PIAC, and he joined us here for this conversation. The ball now is in the court of the powers that be. It's in our court as well for us to read the report, for us to give the feedback, for us to hold the feet of those who are accountable to the fire of accountability. But the rest of that ball rests in their court in terms of implementation. So, Mr. Finance Minister Keno Foriata, the ball is also in your court. Stay with us on the AM show, because up next we have a number of issues we're going to be delving into. One of them hosting the Ghana National Fire Service. Their chief officer will be joining us on the show. Do stay, we'll be right back.